For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for more updates.
Did you know the global economy, which grew at 3.5% last year, will slow down to 2.9% next year? And that this is well below the historical averages? Did you know the strategy of friendshoring or China plus one is going to cost the world economy a growth of 4% and that of China 6.5%? Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host, Anil Padmanabhan. Little over a fortnight ago, Hamas, the militant organization that governs Gaza, launched a deadly attack on Israel. Overnight, geopolitical risks went from bad to worse, especially since this attack happened in the backdrop of a protracted war between Russia and Ukraine on the one hand, and a steady effort by the United States to isolate China on the world stage. This, in turn, is leading to geoeconomic fragmentation. This split in global polity could well be the tipping point for the world economy. To understand the implications, we spoke to Harsh Pant. He is a scholar and professor at King's College London. I began by asking Harsh on his first thoughts on this surge in geopolitical risks that we have witnessed in recent weeks.
It seems pretty extraordinary that we are at a point in global affairs where multiple crises are building up. We really don't know where this is all going, but bigger conflicts start from smaller conflicts. So there is a real danger of stepping into something much bigger here because there are multiple flashpoints across the world that seems to be, becoming, flaring up almost at the same time. And what is, I think, fundamentally scary about today's, environment is that not only is the multilateral order that was created post 1945 to prevent conflicts from escalating not working. In fact, it is deteriorating because of these fault lines that are getting solidified among major players. So, even if you take a local conflict and you say, look, Middle East has always been ablaze. We have had successive conflicts in the Middle East. Israel is not, Israel has always been preoccupied with security issues, and there's a very difficult neighborhood out there which continues to exert its own pulls and pressures in the Middle East. But I think what is interesting this time is that we are seeing global response almost in sync with the larger global fault line. That, you would have the Russians and the Chinese not really naming Hamas, not really condemning Hamas, and you have the West squarely behind Israel, which I think gives you a sense that the big power politics, great power politics, is ultimately now becoming enmeshed in the minor, smaller regional conflicts, and this can likely lead to a bigger conflagration if not controlled. So I think the danger is inherent in the kinds of conflicts we are witnessing, and because, as I said, we don't have an institutional framework to manage them, it's entirely every country on its own trying to decide not only its foreign policy, security policy, but also its individual relationships with that particular stakeholder in that conflict. So I think we are sleepwalking into something bigger. We don't know, but hopefully, I think there are enough flashpoints. Something might also trigger the more, humane side of the international order, and we may come to some consensus on how to manage these multiple crises.
Interesting, because the markets seem to be reflecting what you are articulating right now. There is a fear which is visible in the volatility in several commodity prices, including, of course, oil. So, in fact, a recent survey by the Oxford Economics, they argued that their survey is based on global businesses, which reported a big jump in the perception of the single biggest threat. Earlier, it was not so bad, say, a year ago. Today, businesses see global geopolitical tensions as the single biggest threat. So it concurs with what you have just said. What are your thoughts, connecting the economics to this bad geopolitics?
I think markets will have to factor or will continue to factor these in, because they I think in some ways the biggest issue today in front of the economic structures that the world has is that those structures have not really factored in the kind of geopolitical environment today that we suddenly find ourselves in. That there was a certain kind of a complacency that, look, markets being markets, or nations which are interdependent with each other, would be reluctant to escalate, would be reluctant to go down this trajectory. But what are we witnessing today? That increasingly the responses of the countries have been, whatever the term you may use, deglobalization or de-risking, that we are moving away from the all-encompassing globalized environment that we were so used to. So I think for markets, it's a very challenge. It's a very challenging time. How do you bring in those elements that you are not equipped to deal with? That your understanding of the larger economic environment is still premised on the assumptions that were made at the when the globalization was at its high point. The whole end of history kind of argument that, look, from now on you will have free market capitalism thriving, and every country will become a free market capitalist. But what was not what the argument did not engage with, that what happens when there is a rethink? How do markets respond to that rethink? And I think at this point, markets are also all over the place, because they're there. You see, sometimes they manage it quite well. They absorb a lot of these shocks for an initial phase. We know in the past also we have had Middle Eastern crises, and in some of those crises, oil prices actually remained stable. But in some crises, because the perception was that this would escalate, you saw a dramatic shift in oil prices for a brief period. Now, I think at this point, this is not simply about, if you take just the Middle East, it's not simply the fact that, look, this might bring in Iranians, right? This might escalate to a level where Iranians might jump in. This is also now about that, look, today you are seeing the division of the world into this kind of a America, West, NATO camp, and Iran, Russia, China, kind of North Korea. I think someone mentioned the axis of evil. Again, this term has been used by one of the American senators to depict some of these countries in a certain light. So, but I think that's a real fear, that this is not simply about Iran anymore. That the Middle East conflict, if it escalates, this will not be simply about Iran. You are now beginning to join the dots from Ukraine to Middle East. That the fact that Russians, despite the Chinese close ties with Israel, Russia's close ties with Israel, they have really doubled down on Israel. They've really made it very clear that Hamas is not to be condemned. So I think that aspect is pretty problematic, because that brings in an entirely new dynamic for even the market stakeholders, and who are used to looking at some of these crises, but in a more regional manner. That, look, yes, there will be a crisis for some kind in Taiwan Straits, some kind with Russians, some kind with Middle East. But now you are beginning to join the dots, and I think you are suddenly looking at a world that you really are struggling to understand.
And if we had external threats like pandemics and say climate change, this bad situation becomes super worse, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the interesting thing is that what the pandemic, when it started, it was seen as a health crisis, and it was a health crisis. But how did it manifest itself? It manifested itself in a peculiarly geopolitical manner. This idea that WHO would not release the data, would fudge the data, would not give you adequate information because it is under Chinese pressure. Then that leading to this whole idea of Chinese virus, the West pushed back, the world pushed back. And I think that whole perception that was created, that emerged out of this COVID, was not simply of a health crisis, but how a health crisis is increasingly embedded in the larger geopolitical trends of our times. That you have institutions not working, you have great powers not working together, you have increasingly inward orientation among major powers not willing to share vaccines, pharmaceuticals. I mean, all those are largely embedded in that larger geopolitical climate that we are living in. So I think most of these conversations now, and I think it is very interesting that when you look at the climate debate today, of course, the whole COP brouhaha will be there with us for a while. But what is happening on the ground is very evident, that every country is on its own now. That countries, even the Western countries, are looking at a very different dynamic of declining economic growths, great resentment among the middle classes. So how do you respond to that? You can't respond to that by doubling down on on climate tax, etc., which is what we have seen. Governments are being voted out for that. New Zealand being one of the recent examples where you had a center-left government was voted out, partly not obviously for entirely for that reason, but there is a subtext here in the way nations, people are relating to the wider global trends. And I think almost all of these issues are getting enmeshed in the wider geopolitical debates. And as you move forward, I think it would be extremely difficult to figure out collective responses to these challenges. So again, as you rightly say, the situation gets from bad to worse, because not only on peace and security issues there is a great fragmentation, but even on those issues which one used to say, oh, these are relatively softer issues, it's easier to come together on climate, on health, but everything is becoming contested. And I think in that contestation perhaps lies the story of our times.
So, Harsh, given these fault lines, which are now beginning to intrude on even multilateral issues like climate change, how does a country like India deal with this challenge?
See, India, the primary focus of India certainly should be on domestic, meeting its domestic developmental requirements. And I think broadly what we have seen is that the kind of positions we have taken is in sync with managing our domestic needs, whether it is the Russia-Ukraine crisis or even the Middle Eastern crisis at the moment that is unfolding, or this idea that how can we use certain crises to enhance our capabilities. I think COVID was used effectively by India to demonstrate not only its ability to shape the global pharmaceutical industry, but also as a provider of global public goods, that we could be provider of vaccines to the world in ways that perhaps no other country could have done. So in a sense, that articulation of India as a country that is focused on its domestic needs, but when the crisis comes, we are also standing with everyone, with our important stakeholders. And you see that trend, whether it is, despite our troubled ties with Turkey, you saw India helping Turkey during the earthquake. We saw, I think there was a lot of misunderstanding about India's response to this particular crisis in Middle East. But what are we witnessing today? India is one of the fewer countries that is actually delivering aid for the Palestinians. Many countries have said many big words, but what is their what is their role on the ground? Whereas India here is actually delivering aid on the ground to the people where it matters. So I think in some ways India's response has been about India first, but also about how India can reach out to its partners, to its stakeholders, and to the world at large when there is a need. But fundamentally, I think this is also because the polarization in the world is so high. I think India is standing out as a voice of sanity. India is standing out as a voice that at least has the ability to manage multiple contradictions. That perhaps can be India's unique contribution, something that we saw during the G20 as well. But I think increasingly it would be because the multilateral order is in crisis, because the multilateral institutional frameworks are not working, countries like India will be asked to do much more. And I think India is already underscoring that it is willing to do much more. not only articulating new ideas, but also getting together with like-minded countries to deliver substantive outcomes. So I think both broadly domestically keep the focus on the domestic economy, because that is, in any case, will have to be the priority given the stakes, given our requirements, and where the world is at this point. Because when you talk of deglobalization, when you talk of de-risking, it will impact India. India has been part of the globalization framework so far. That was all encompassing. Now, as countries relook at their supply chains, at their economic structures, India will also have to figure out how it wants to be part of that larger matrix. And I think in some cases we are beginning to look at some evidence of success, where some critical manufacturing has come to India, where India's relations with Taiwan on semiconductors are bearing fruit. But it will take some time. It's not going to be a short hold. But building capacity at home, as well as linking up with external partners, certainly will shore up India's capacity to deliver at home. And I think that is going to be India's priority.
One fallout of the new fault lines in the world is geoeconomic fragmentation. In fact, the just concluded meetings of the International Monetary Fund in Marrakesh flagged this as a serious risk to the world.
Absolutely. I think the geopolitics is feeding into these economic trends, and because economics has become secondary to geopolitics, I think the effect that we are seeing will be manifesting themselves over a period of time, and I think for an emerging economy, that's not really very good news, because you have to be able to secure these rates of growth for a while. Not only to meet your domestic developmental requirements, but also to be able to, as we were discussing, to be able to be resilient enough to stand up for yourself and for your interests. And I think there is, as you say, a perfect storm brewing. And I think there is no denying the fact that this fragmentation of the geoeconomic order, it will have a disproportionate impact on a country like India, which has been at the center of these developments and has been able to, make the most of it. We have been a net beneficiary of this over the last 4 decades. And I think not to be able to leverage that is going to be a huge challenge.
It is then clear that a combination of factors, some man-made, some natural, have brought the world to a brink. All this while actorless threats like pandemics and climate change continue to grow dangerously. This begs the question, that is the world on the road to perdition? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNewsGlobal on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please do share your thoughts, ideas and suggestions with us. I'm available on Twitter, or what we call X, at capitalcalculus.com. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.